On a quiet morning in Martinsburg, West Virginia, in early June 2002, the life of 26-year-old Hannah Caldwell changed forever. Hannah was known in her community for her kindness, her dedication to her work at a local library, and the warmth she shared with friends and neighbors. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through the town, and the question on everyone's mind was the same. Where had she gone? Hannah lived alone in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Martinsburg, and her routine was simple. She walked to work each morning, returned home by evening, and often spent time volunteering at the community center on weekends. On June 5, 2002, she left for her usual early morning walk and never returned. Her co-workers noticed her absence immediately when she failed to show up at the library, which was highly unusual for her. They called her home and received no answer. Concern turned to alarm, and within hours, the Martinsburg Police Department was notified of a potential missing person case. Investigators arrived at Hannah's apartment and found nothing immediately suggesting foul play. Yet small details raised suspicions. Her front door was locked, her personal belongings appeared untouched, and her car was still in the parking lot. Her purse, identification, and keys were left behind. Friends and family emphasized that Hannah was responsible and meticulous, making her disappearance all the more mysterious. Officers began canvassing the neighborhood, talking to neighbors, and searching for anyone who had seen her that morning. The investigation expanded quickly, but in the absence of clear leads, the community began to fear the worst. The Martinsburg Police Department worked tirelessly in the initial days, combining routine investigative procedures with public appeals. Flyers were distributed throughout the town, urging anyone with information to come forward. Local media covered Hannah's disappearance extensively, sharing photographs and descriptions, hoping to reach anyone who might have witnessed her movements or known her routines. Community members organized search parties, walking through nearby trails, parks, and abandoned areas, combing for signs of Hannah. Days stretched into weeks, and despite their efforts, no significant evidence was found. The case quickly transitioned from an active missing person investigation to a long-term cold case. Over the years, small tips would occasionally surface, calls from individuals claiming to have seen her, or sightings reported by travelers passing through the town, but none led to concrete results. For the Caldwell family, every unconfirmed lead was a mixture of hope and heartbreak. Hannah's mother, Patricia Caldwell, kept her daughter's room exactly as it had been on the day she vanished, holding on to a sense of presence and continuity amidst the uncertainty. Her father, Thomas Caldwell, spent years coordinating with investigators, refusing to let the case fade from the public consciousness, knowing that every piece of evidence preserved could one day be crucial. In the years that followed, technology began to change the landscape of criminal investigation. Forensic DNA analysis evolved dramatically between 2002 and 2018, offering new possibilities for cases that had once seemed unsolvable. The Martinsburg Police Department, in collaboration with state and federal forensic laboratories, began revisiting cold cases using modern DNA techniques. Items collected from the initial investigation, Hannah's personal effects, samples from her apartment, and evidence gathered from surrounding areas were carefully catalogued and preserved, allowing for re-examination under the most advanced methods available. By 2018, investigators decided to run Hannah's case through a newly developed national DNA database. The database, which had grown substantially over the years, allowed law enforcement to compare genetic material from unsolved cases against known offenders and unidentified DNA profiles. The decision to retest items from the original investigation was deliberate, combining hope with the understanding that many cases remained unresolved despite persistent effort. Every detail mattered. Even the smallest overlooked clue could become the key to unlocking the truth. In the summer of 2019, forensic analysts identified a match that changed everything. a cigarette butt found near the entrance of Hannah's apartment complex, originally catalogued but not fully analyzed due to technological limitations at the time, contained DNA consistent with a known offender in the national database. The DNA belonged to a man who had previously been convicted of violent offenses, living within the state at the time of Hannah's disappearance. This revelation reignited the investigation and immediately directed law enforcement toward a suspect who had previously avoided scrutiny. Detectives quickly assembled a team to review every detail of the case in light of this new information. They conducted interviews with anyone who might have encountered the suspect during the relevant period, re-examined original witness statements, and cross-referenced his movements with the timeline of Hannah's disappearance. Patterns emerged that had been overlooked in the early 2000s, revealing connections between the suspect and areas near Hannah's apartment. Each piece of information, previously isolated, now formed a coherent picture that reinforced the likelihood of his involvement. Hannah's family was contacted as soon as investigators confirmed the significance of the DNA match. The news was a mix of relief and renewed anxiety. Relief came from the knowledge that law enforcement now had a lead that could finally resolve the years-long uncertainty. Anxiety came from the thought of confronting the details of the crime that had haunted them for nearly 2 decades. Patricia and Thomas Caldwell met with detectives, providing additional context about Hannah's routines, social interactions, and habits. Their input helped refine the investigation, underscoring the importance of family involvement in cold cases. With the suspect identified and evidence re-examined, prosecutors prepared to move forward with an arrest. Law enforcement coordinated meticulously, balancing the need for caution with the urgency of ensuring that the suspect could be apprehended safely. Surveillance and planning culminated in a quiet early morning operation, where officers successfully arrested the individual without incident. The arrest itself made headlines in local and state media, with coverage emphasizing the resolution of a case that had remained unsolved for 17 years. The community's reaction was profound. Neighbors who remembered the shock of Hannah's disappearance expressed a mixture of disbelief and relief. Local officials held press conferences, highlighting the advancements in forensic technology that had made the arrest possible. Residents reflected on the collective anxiety that had persisted over the years and celebrated the perseverance of both law enforcement and the Caldwell family. The case became an example of how dedication, combined with evolving scientific methods, could achieve justice even after many years of uncertainty. Following the arrest, prosecutors built a case grounded in both the DNA evidence and corroborating details uncovered during renewed investigations. The suspect's prior history, combined with his proximity to Hannah's apartment and behavioral patterns, created a compelling narrative of culpability. Investigators also located additional physical evidence that linked him to the crime scene, reinforcing the strength of the case. The careful preservation of original materials, meticulous documentation, and the integration of new forensic technology proved pivotal in ensuring that the case could withstand legal scrutiny. The Caldwell family, while prepared for the trial process, experienced a resurgence of emotions. Each court appearance and legal proceeding forced them to confront details of Hannah's disappearance that had remained dormant for nearly 2 decades. Yet amidst the difficulty, they also felt a renewed sense of hope. For years, the absence of answers had created a void, leaving them unable to fully grieve or find closure. Now, with a suspect in custody and the promise of a trial, the possibility of finality emerged for the first time. Detectives involved in the case noted the extraordinary importance of preserving evidence and maintaining detailed records. They shared insights with colleagues and other departments, emphasizing that cold cases often hinge on seemingly minor items that can gain significance when analyzed with contemporary methods. The Hannah Caldwell investigation became a reference point for best practices in cold case management, highlighting the intersection of diligence, technological innovation, and collaborative effort. As preparations for trial continued, the Caldwell family began to engage more publicly with the community. They spoke at local events about the emotional toll of long-term uncertainty and the critical importance of supporting law enforcement efforts in unresolved cases. Their advocacy helped raise awareness of missing persons issues, encouraging others to remain vigilant and proactive. This engagement not only honored Hannah's memory, but also transformed a deeply personal tragedy into a source of communal education and empowerment. At the same time, law enforcement worked to ensure that every procedural step was meticulously followed. Investigators re-examined witness statements, cross-checked timelines, and documented the chain of custody for every piece of evidence. These efforts ensured that the prosecution could present an airtight case, minimizing the risk of appeals, based on technicalities and reinforcing public confidence in the judicial process. The careful attention to detail reflected both professional standards and the human imperative to seek justice. For a victim whose voice had been silenced, with the suspect formally charged, the legal process moved toward trial. Pre-trial hearings addressed motions, admissibility of evidence, and the presentation of forensic findings. The DNA evidence from the cigarette butt was central, providing a definitive link between the suspect and the crime. Prosecutors emphasized the consistency of this evidence with the totality of the investigation, including witness accounts, behavioral patterns, and circumstantial connections. Defense attorneys challenged aspects of the investigation, but the thorough documentation and chain of custody of the evidence proved decisive in maintaining credibility and reliability. Community members followed the proceedings closely, eager for updates that might bring a sense of resolution. Local news outlets provided regular coverage, highlighting the meticulous work of investigators and the determination of the Caldwell family. The case became a touchstone for conversations about the importance of forensic science, the role of persistence in law enforcement, and the resilience of families who refuse to let cases fade into obscurity. Residents expressed pride in their police department for maintaining focus on the case and achieving results. Even after so many years, the arrest and subsequent trial planning marked a turning point in the Hannah Caldwell case. After 17 years, the threads of uncertainty were being woven into a coherent narrative, supported by compelling evidence and detailed investigative work. While the legal process would still require months of preparation, hearings, and the trial itself, the foundation for justice was firmly established. For the Caldwell family, this moment represented not only hope, but also a long-awaited recognition of the importance of their daughter's life and the pursuit of truth on her behalf. Once the suspect was in custody, the Martinsburg Police Department intensified their efforts to reconstruct every moment of that summer morning in 2002. Detectives pored over old reports, witness statements, and crime scene notes, integrating them with new findings uncovered during the DNA breakthrough. The cigarette butt, which had sat unnoticed in evidence for nearly 17 years, became the pivotal piece connecting the suspect to Hannah Caldwell. For the first time, investigators felt confident in establishing a timeline that could withstand scrutiny in court. The initial days following the arrest were focused on locating additional evidence and confirming the suspect's presence in the area at the time of Hannah's disappearance. Investigators reviewed phone records, bank transactions, and employment logs from 2002. Each item, seemingly mundane on its own, began to form a pattern pointing unmistakably toward the suspect. Surveillance footage from local businesses, though grainy and dated, revealed movement consistent with what witnesses had recalled. Every detail, previously too small to prove anything, now contributed to a clear narrative. The suspect, a 42-year-old man named Marcus Whitman, had lived in Martinsburg in 2002, within a short distance of Hannah's apartment. Whitman had a history of non-violent offenses, but no prior record of crime similar to Hannah's disappearance. This lack of direct criminal history made him an unlikely suspect at the time of the original investigation, explaining why he had not been thoroughly investigated back then. However, the DNA evidence forced authorities to reconsider the possibility that someone who had been overlooked could be responsible for such a serious crime. Detectives approached Whitman for questioning with caution. They were aware that any misstep could compromise the case. The interviews were lengthy and detailed, covering his whereabouts on the morning of June 5, 2002, interactions with neighbors, and personal habits. Initially, Whitman denied any involvement, claiming he had no knowledge of Hannah or her routines. Investigators noted inconsistencies in his statements, particularly concerning places he had visited and people he had interacted with in Martinsburg at the time. These discrepancies, when cross-referenced with the timeline reconstructed from witness reports and forensic evidence, began to cast significant doubt on his denials. While questioning Whitman, investigators also revisited key witnesses from 2002. Neighbors who had seen Hannah on the morning she disappeared were interviewed again, with detectives clarifying details that might have been overlooked in the initial investigation. Memory can be unreliable over time, but patterns emerged that aligned with the suspect's known movements. For instance, one neighbor recalled seeing a man loitering near the apartment complex earlier than they initially reported. At first, the detail had seemed trivial, but when matched with Whitman's reconstructed timeline, it became highly significant. In parallel, forensic experts analyzed additional items collected from Hannah's apartment complex. Door handles, light switches, and other high-contact surfaces were re-examined for traces of DNA. While much of the material had degraded over time, small fragments of genetic material were recovered from areas frequently touched by visitors or residents. These fragments, when processed using modern DNA amplification techniques, consistently matched Whitman, providing multiple points of connection between him and the scene. The redundancy of evidence strengthened the case against him, making it less likely that the results could be dismissed as coincidental contamination. The investigation also uncovered subtle behavioral patterns that suggested premeditation. Surveillance and witness statements indicated that Whitman had known the layout of the apartment complex well and had frequented nearby areas in a manner consistent with someone familiar with the routines of residents. While no one at the time could have definitively linked him to Hannah's disappearance, the reconstructed patterns from phone records, eyewitness accounts, and forensic data now indicated a deliberate presence. Each piece of information, when pieced together, presented a coherent sequence leading up to the morning of June 5, 2002. As the weeks passed, prosecutors reviewed the investigative findings to build a case for trial. The combination of DNA evidence, corroborating witness accounts, and behavioral analysis provided a compelling narrative of culpability. Legal experts emphasized the importance of presenting the case in a way that demonstrated both the reliability of the evidence and the meticulous work done by investigators. This approach was crucial because the events had occurred nearly 2 decades earlier, and defense attorneys could attempt to argue that memories were unreliable or that evidence had degraded over time. During this period, the Caldwell family continued to engage with investigators. Their insights, drawn from intimate knowledge of Hannah's life, habits, and interactions, proved invaluable in refining the timeline and validating key aspects of the investigation. For instance, Hannah's morning routine, which had been documented in journals and shared with close friends, allowed investigators to pinpoint the narrow window during which her disappearance likely occurred. This attention to detail helped establish the plausibility of the suspect's presence at critical locations and times, reinforcing the prosecution's case. The Martinsburg community, long haunted by Hannah's disappearance, followed the developments with a mixture of anticipation and relief. Local media provided updates on the arrest and subsequent investigations, emphasizing the remarkable role of modern forensic science in solving a case that had gone cold for 17 years. Residents expressed admiration for both the persistence of law enforcement and the resilience of the Caldwell family. Many remarked on the emotional toll of waiting nearly 2 decades for answers and the profound impact the case had on community awareness regarding missing persons. Investigators also used the period following the arrest to revisit other cold cases in the region. The success of the DNA analysis in Hannah Caldwell's case inspired renewed efforts to apply similar techniques elsewhere. Items previously considered irrelevant or too degraded were now potential sources of crucial evidence. The Martinsburg Police Department documented their methods and shared findings with state and national cold case units, contributing to a broader understanding of how forensic advancements can breathe new life into cases once considered unsolvable. As prosecutors prepared to file formal charges against Whitman, they ensured that every piece of evidence was thoroughly reviewed, catalogued, and presented in a manner consistent with legal standards. Expert witnesses, including forensic scientists who had conducted the DNA analyses, were prepared to testify about the methodology, reliability, and significance of their findings. Witnesses who had observed the suspect's presence near the apartment complex in 2002 were briefed on courtroom procedures to ensure clarity and consistency in their testimony. Every precaution was taken to prevent the defense from undermining the integrity of the evidence. Once charges were filed, the legal process began in earnest. Pre-trial motions addressed admissibility of the DNA evidence, procedural concerns, and the potential for challenges based on the passage of time. Prosecutors anticipated these challenges and prepared detailed documentation showing the preservation of evidence, chain of custody records, and the consistency of forensic results. Defense attorneys attempted to question the reliability of the DNA match, citing the elapsed time and possible contamination. But forensic experts presented comprehensive explanations that countered these claims. In addition to DNA evidence, investigators presented a series of circumstantial elements that reinforced the prosecution's narrative. These included the suspect's proximity to Hannah's apartment, reconstructed movements consistent with witness reports, and behavioral patterns suggesting premeditation. Each element, while perhaps insufficient alone, collectively painted a picture of deliberate action. The redundancy of evidence created a compelling case that could not easily be dismissed, emphasizing both the careful investigation and the modern forensic techniques that made the case solvable. The Caldwell family attended the initial court proceedings, witnessing the formal charges and hearing the evidence laid out by the prosecution. For Patricia and Thomas Caldwell, the process was emotionally complex, painful yet hopeful. Each new detail brought memories of Hannah to the forefront, but it also reaffirmed the importance of pursuing justice despite the years that had passed. The trial preparations reinforced their understanding that every moment of investigative diligence had mattered, and that the eventual resolution would honor Hannah's life and memory. Community organizations and local advocacy groups expressed support for the family during this challenging period. Events were organized to educate the public about missing persons, cold cases, and the evolving role of forensic science. These efforts emphasized the importance of persistence, community vigilance, and technological innovation in solving long-standing mysteries. Residents reflected on the collective impact of Hannah's disappearance and how the eventual breakthrough could serve as a model for other communities facing similar challenges. As pre-trial proceedings continued, Investigators and prosecutors collaborated closely to ensure that the case was airtight. Expert testimony was meticulously prepared, exhibits were carefully catalogued, and witness preparation was emphasized to avoid inconsistencies. The prosecution's strategy relied on the convergence of scientific evidence, corroborated accounts, and a clear timeline of events, all aimed at demonstrating the suspect's involvement beyond a reasonable doubt. Throughout this period, public interest remained high. News outlets documented each stage, highlighting the integration of modern forensic science with persistent investigative work. Analysts discussed the significance of DNA databases, advances in genetic profiling, and the ways in which cases that had long gone cold could finally be resolved. The Martinsburg Police Department was praised for its methodical approach, highlighting the dedication required to maintain focus on cases that might otherwise fade into obscurity. For the Caldwell family, each day brought a mixture of anxiety and hope. They understood that the legal process could be lengthy and complex, but they also recognized that the breakthrough evidence had finally placed them on the path toward closure. While the emotional journey was far from over, the arrest and investigative rigor offered a sense of progress and validation. Hannah's life, once overshadowed by uncertainty, was now at the center of a pursuit for justice that honored her memory and resilience. The trial of Marcus Whitman began in early 2020, nearly 18 years after Hannah Caldwell's disappearance. The courtroom was filled with anticipation, tension, and a sense of justice long delayed. For the Caldwell family, every step in the proceedings was a mix of relief and heartache, as memories of that summer morning in 2002 resurfaced with every piece of evidence presented. Yet after so many years of uncertainty, there was also a quiet determination to see the case through, to witness the resolution that had seemed impossible for nearly 2 decades. From the opening statements, the prosecution made it clear that the case rested on the convergence of meticulous investigative work and modern forensic science. The DNA evidence recovered from the cigarette butt, along with additional fragments from Hannah's apartment, formed the backbone of the argument. Expert witnesses explained the testing methods in detail, emphasizing the integrity of the samples, the chain of custody, and the statistical probability that the DNA match could be coincidental, an astronomically low figure. The courtroom listened intently as the science was broken down into clear, understandable terms, demonstrating the power of forensic advancements in solving long, cold cases. Witnesses who had known Hannah personally took the stand to describe her life, her routines, and the moments leading up to her disappearance. Friends recalled the small everyday interactions that painted a picture of a young woman full of promise, connected to her community, and beloved by those around her. Neighbors recounted the events of that morning, providing accounts that, while faint in memory after so many years, aligned remarkably with the reconstructed timeline. Each story, though seemingly small, reinforced the narrative the prosecution had meticulously built, that Hannah had been taken during a precise window of time, and the suspect's presence at key locations could not be coincidental. The defense sought to challenge the reliability of the evidence and the credibility of witnesses. They argued that memories after 18 years could not be trusted, and that DNA evidence might have been contaminated or mishandled. Yet the prosecution anticipated these arguments, presenting comprehensive documentation showing the careful preservation of evidence, repeated validation of results, and independent verification by multiple forensic labs. The consistency and redundancy of the evidence made it difficult for the defense to mount a credible challenge. Cross-examinations highlighted the thoroughness of the investigation and the modern techniques that had finally uncovered the truth. During the trial, the Caldwell family observed quietly, absorbing each testimony, each piece of forensic explanation, and each account of Hannah's life. While the process was emotionally taxing, it also provided a measure of closure. The courtroom became a space where their daughter's story was acknowledged fully, not just the tragedy of her disappearance, but the vibrancy of her life and the impact she had on those around her. Every witness who spoke in her memory reinforced the reality that Hannah was more than a cold case file. She was a person whose life mattered deeply. One of the most powerful moments came when forensic experts testified about the DNA found on the cigarette butt. They explained how at the time of Hannah's disappearance, technology had not been sufficient to isolate and match the sample conclusively. Advances in genetic amplification and profiling, however, had made it possible to extract a reliable profile from even degraded evidence. The match to Marcus Whitman was confirmed repeatedly, with independent labs verifying the results. The statistical likelihood of error was effectively zero, leaving the jury with a clear understanding of the weight of this scientific breakthrough. The prosecution also presented circumstantial evidence to reinforce the narrative. Phone records, bank transactions, and reconstructed movements of the suspect placed him in proximity to Hannah's apartment on the day she disappeared. Behavioral patterns suggested familiarity with the area and the routines of residents, further corroborating the DNA evidence. While circumstantial evidence alone might have been insufficient, combined with the scientific confirmation, it created an irrefutable chain of reasoning that left little room for doubt. Throughout the trial, media coverage remained intense but respectful. Local news outlets reported on the developments, highlighting the intersection of perseverance, science, and community support that had brought the case to this point. Analysts discussed how cold cases could now be solved using techniques unavailable in the early 2000s, emphasizing the importance of revisiting old evidence with new tools. The public response reflected a shared sense of justice delayed but not denied, with many expressing admiration for both law enforcement and the Caldwell family. The defense made one final attempt to introduce doubt, suggesting that the DNA sample could have been transferred unintentionally, or that other unidentified individuals might have left genetic material. Expert witnesses dismantled these claims with methodical explanations of laboratory protocols, contamination prevention measures, and statistical likelihoods. The jury was shown how every conceivable source of error had been accounted for, and how the DNA match could only point to Marcus Whitman. The clarity and rigor of the evidence left the defense with few options and reinforced the prosecution's case. After weeks of testimony, closing arguments emphasized the human dimension of the case. The prosecution highlighted Hannah's life, the impact of her disappearance on her family, and the painstaking investigative work that had finally brought answers. The defense acknowledged the passage of time and the difficulty of recalling events from nearly 2 decades prior, but maintained that reasonable doubt should prevent a conviction. The jury, however, had been presented with clear, corroborated evidence demonstrating the suspect's involvement. Deliberations lasted less than 2 days. When the jury returned with a guilty verdict, the courtroom filled with a mixture of relief, quiet sobs, and restrained smiles. For the Caldwell family, it was a moment of profound emotional release. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. The sense of uncertainty that had haunted them for years lifted, replaced by a recognition that Hannah's life and memory had been honored. Sentencing followed shortly thereafter. Marcus Whitman received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, reflecting the severity of his actions and the enduring impact of Hannah's loss. The judge's remarks acknowledged both the meticulous investigative work and the courage of the Caldwell family in pursuing justice despite the passage of time. The sentence provided not just legal closure, but a symbolic acknowledgement of the value of persistence, science, and community engagement in solving cold cases. In the weeks following the trial, the Caldwell family began the slow process of rebuilding and healing. They organized small commemorative events in Hannah's honor, inviting friends, neighbors, and community members who had supported them over the years. These gatherings focused on celebration rather than sorrow, highlighting Hannah's life, her ambitions, and the connections she had forged. Friends and neighbors shared stories, photographs, and memories, ensuring that Hannah's presence continued to resonate within the community. Local authorities used the success of this case to emphasize the importance of preserving evidence, revisiting unsolved cases, and applying modern forensic techniques. Workshops, training sessions, and public awareness campaigns highlighted how cold cases could be resolved even after many years. The Martinsburg Police Department documented their methods, sharing lessons learned with other law enforcement agencies. The case became a model for integrating historical investigative diligence with technological innovation, demonstrating that even the oldest mysteries could be solved with persistence and expertise. The emotional impact on the community was also profound. For neighbors who had lived with the uncertainty and speculation for years, the resolution provided a sense of closure and reassurance. Parents reflected on the importance of vigilance, community support, and proactive reporting. Local organizations, focused on missing persons and victim advocacy, drew inspiration from the Caldwell case, emphasizing the potential of combined investigative and forensic efforts to prevent prolonged uncertainty for families across the state. Over time, the Caldwell family continued to honor Hannah's memory through philanthropic efforts and community engagement. Scholarships in her name were established, supporting young women pursuing higher education or careers in public service. Memorial events encouraged reflection, storytelling, and the preservation of Hannah's legacy. Through these efforts, the community transformed a tragic chapter into a lasting source of inspiration and empowerment. The West Virginia 2002 Cold case became emblematic of how time, technology, and human determination could converge to reveal truth. What had once seemed impossible, a resolution after 17 years, was achieved through a combination of forensic innovation, detailed investigative work, and the unwavering commitment of those seeking justice. The case highlighted the importance of never giving up, of revisiting overlooked evidence, and of trusting in both science and perseverance to uncover long-hidden truths. Even years later, residents of Martinsburg remembered the story not solely as a tale of tragedy, but as one of resilience and eventual justice. Hannah Caldwell's life and memory became a testament to the power of persistence, the potential of modern investigative techniques, and the importance of community engagement in addressing unsolved crimes. The resolution brought peace to her family, closure to a grieving town, and a clear message to the world: time may pass, but truth endures. For Patricia and Thomas Caldwell, the conclusion of the trial was the beginning of a new chapter. While they would always carry the memory of their daughter, they found comfort in the knowledge that justice had been served. Their journey through uncertainty, fear, and hope had finally reached an endpoint. Through their perseverance, they demonstrated that even after years of waiting, determination and patience could yield profound results. The Martinsburg Police Department, reflecting on the case, continued to advocate for cold case reviews, evidence preservation, and public awareness. The success of the Caldwell investigation reinforced the value of integrating historical investigative knowledge with modern scientific methods. It underscored the reality that every detail, no matter how small or overlooked, could one day play a crucial role in uncovering truth. In the end, the West Virginia 2002 cold case was not just about solving a crime. It was about restoring faith, delivering closure, and honoring a life lost too soon. It demonstrated the enduring impact of forensic science, the importance of dedicated law enforcement, and the resilience of families determined to see justice served. Hannah Caldwell's story, once shrouded in mystery, was finally illuminated by truth, allowing her family, her community, and the broader public to find peace